For 5 years after Order 66, Kestis lived by one rule that proved the Jedi Council wrong: never use the Force. He hid on Bracca, a junkyard planet in the Mid-Rim, scrapping old warships alongside workers who had no idea what he was, and buried every instinct his master ever gave him. In the game Jedi Fallen Order, when Cal meditates and lets his guard down, he loses control. He keeps getting dragged back to the moment he lost his master. His Force abilities were not cut off by the Empire, they were locked behind grief the Jedi never taught him to carry. But what broke Cal's connection to the Force would turn out to be exactly what brought it back. On Bracca, Cal lived by 4 rules: keep quiet, accept the past, trust nobody, and most importantly, never reach within. He worked the same shifts as everyone else, ate the same food, formed a real friendship with a worker named Prof, who never asked about his past. For 5 years, Cal had what the Order never offered him, a life he was free to walk away from. The Jedi had built his beliefs, his habits, and his entire social world before he was old enough to evaluate any of it, and Bracca was the first time he could measure that world against something outside it. His first use of the Force in 5 years was not a return to the Order, it was reflex. When Prof fell from a collapsing platform towards certain death, Cal reached out without thinking and froze him in midair. He did not reconnect with the Force to serve a cause or honor a legacy. He did it to save someone he cared about. Prof had no idea what had just happened. Cal made sure it stayed that way. He knew there were bounties on people like him, so even the moment of saving a friend came wrapped in fear, because the Purge had made any public use of the Force a potentially fatal exposure. Reconnecting, though, was not the same as recovering. As long as he was alive, he still had a choice, the one thing the old system had denied him as a child. Returning to the Jedi path would mean something only because he could now refuse it. Cal's abilities came back in pieces, one memory at a time. Each new power returned only after he processed a specific lesson from his dead master, Jar Tapal. On Zepho, he relived a lesson about persistence and regained Force push. In the Tomb of Mictrol, he relived a lesson about connection and recovered Force pull. His healing did not come from schedules or discipline. It came from confronting memories he had spent 5 years avoiding. Cal's Order 66 flashback shows exactly how the trauma formed. He was a child aboard a Republic Star Destroyer when the clones turned. His master sensed the betrayal through the Force before the first shot was fired. Tapal sealed blast doors, held off his own soldiers, and shielded Cal all the way to the escape pods. By the time they reached the hangar, Tapal could barely stand. Cal froze an entire clone squad with a desperate burst of Force energy, pulled his master into the pod, and ejected. Tapal handed Cal his damaged lightsaber with one final instruction: trust only in the Force. Seconds later, Cal was alone, holding a weapon he could not safely carry, on a planet he would not leave until Cere found him. Every part of the Jedi system, the clones, the war, the chain of command, had betrayed him at once. The Order gave him abilities, placed him inside a military structure, and offered no preparation for the moment that structure tried to kill him. But Cal had one gift that made institutional distance almost impossible for him, and it would change how he saw every conflict for the rest of his life. Psychometry was an echo in the Force from an object. When Cal touched something, he experienced pieces of its history. On Kashyyyk, he picked up a dead partisan's helmet and experienced an echo of Trilla choking and killing the soldier. He dropped the helmet, shaken. Inside the Fortress Inquisitorius, Cal could almost hear screams from the interrogation chair where the Empire had broken captured Jedi and turned them into Inquisitors. In the canon comic, Kanan the Last Padawan, another Padawan survivor followed the exact same path. Caleb Dume lost his master, Depa Billaba, during Order 66. He hid his identity, changed his name to Kanan Jarrus, and learned to survive beyond the institution that had formed him. Before she died, Billaba left Caleb with an insight unusual for a council member. The Jedi had made a crucial error in taking military titles. Emotions were valuable and should not be suppressed, but a Padawan had to learn to rule them, not let them rule him. Cal and Kanan both prove it. Neither one became a real Jedi until the Jedi Order was gone and the decision was finally theirs. But Cal's story goes further. because his mission in Jedi Fallen Order was built around finding something the old Jedi would have used to restart the cycle. What he chose to do with it instead was the sharpest rejection of the old order anyone has ever put on screen. From the moment Cal stepped on Bogano, the mission had one purpose: find the Jedi holocron inside the ancient Zepho vault. It held a list of Force-sensitive children scattered across the galaxy, and Cere wanted to use it to rebuild the Order and defeat the Empire. Cal believed her. Cordova's recording made it plain. The holocron was the key to rebirth, the way to bring peace and freedom back to the galaxy. He crossed multiple worlds, racing the Inquisitors for the vault's secrets, and building a new lightsaber from the broken halves of his master's weapon and Cere's old hilt. He survived Darth Vader inside the Fortress Inquisitorius, watched Trilla die, and nearly drowned before Merrin pulled him out of the water with Nightsister magic, a Force tradition rooted in Dathomir that looked nothing like anything the Jedi practiced. When Cal finally held the holocron aboard the Mantis, the crew gathered around him. Merrin saw the names inside it as the next generation of Jedi. The obvious problem was that the Empire would hunt those children the same way it hunted them, and every child on that list would have their life forever changed. If you want to see more videos like this one, a quick subscribe means you will always be first to know. Cal picked up the holocron, looked at Cere, and made his decision. The children's destiny would not be decided by them. He drew his lightsaber and cut the holocron in half, and its secrets scattered across the table, gone forever. Cere did not argue. She nodded, barely, a former Jedi Knight validating the decision to let the institution die rather than repeat the cycle of choosing other people's futures for them. But Cal's own emotions, the ones the Jedi always warned about, were already proving they had a point. Before the fortress, before the holocron, Cal nearly shattered on Dathomir. In the Tomb of Kujet, the dark side showed him a vision of his dead master, and the Phantom's message was clear. Fear had broken his connection to the Force. Cal screamed in anger and struck the vision down, but when he came back to reality, his lightsaber crystal had cracked apart, not from combat, but from rage. On Kashyyyk, Cal calmed a hostile creature through the Force and then faced what he had been running from. He was more scared than he had ever been. Running around with a lightsaber made things feel better, but the fear he had bottled up since the Purge was still inside him. The Jedi were right that emotion mixed with the Force could become dangerous. Where Cal's experience exposed a failure was in how unevenly the Order prepared its members to process trauma. Balaba's own teaching proved the point existed somewhere in the Order, but Cal and Cere still emerged without the tools they needed when grief broke through the discipline they'd been taught. Cere is the clearest proof. Aboard the Mantis, she finally gave Cal the full story. She had been captured by the Empire, and she resisted until a dark figure arrived, worse than any nightmare she could have imagined, and she came apart. She gave up Trilla's location, and when she later saw what the Empire had done to her Padawan, something broke inside her. She lost control, tapped into the dark side, and killed every Imperial in the room. Every last one of them, except Trilla. Afterwards, she spent years unable to forgive herself. All she wanted to do was die. She tried pushing the rage down, but there was no hiding from herself. Cere's dark side outbursts came after torture and guilt, not from simple weakness. The system had given her no middle ground between composure and collapse. She had been trained to keep emotions sealed, and when the seal broke, everything came out at once with no structure around it. She could not change what she did, just as Cal could not change what happened to his master. Moving on was a choice, and he had to make it. Her advice did not come from doctrine. It came from surviving the consequences of a doctrine that had already failed her. Years later, inside the Fortress Inquisitorius, the same danger returned. Cere used the dark side against Darth Vader, pouring hatred into the Force to slow him down. Cal called out to her. She still had a choice. Her face softened, and she shifted from dark side rage to a calm shield of light, holding Vader back while Cal flooded the chamber to cover their escape. Cal's honesty gave Cere what doctrine alone had not given her in that moment, a trusted person calling her back without denying what she felt. And she heard him because he was someone she trusted, not someone who outranked her. In the canon novel Battle Scars, that failure shows up from the Empire's side. The fifth brother, one of the Inquisitors hunting Cal's crew, was taken from his family as a child by the Jedi. he was promised a meaningful life in service to the greatest power in the galaxy. Instead, the Jedi made him serve politicians and looked away while the Senate stripped his home world for resources. The Jedi had sworn to be the brightest stars in the galaxy, a billion suns against the dark. The fifth brother believed they became a black hole instead, consuming the light and the lightest among them to feed their own egos. The fifth brother carried real bitterness and a legitimate grievance. When the Empire offered him a path built on that rage, he took it. He became a threat not because the dark side found him, he became a threat because the Jedi gave him no vocabulary for what he already felt. Cal's path showed the other option. Facing fear did not make him fearless, but it gave him back the Force, and confronting grief did not erase it, but it made him capable of fighting. But in the game Jedi Survivor, Cal met a man named Bode Akuna who shared his Jedi background and had survived the Purge. Bode loved someone just as deeply as Cal did, and he proved that attachment could destroy a person just as completely as the Jedi always feared. Bode was a former Jedi with a daughter named Kata, and everything he did was aimed at keeping her safe. Cal and Bode bonded over shared loss, fought side by side, and Cal trusted him completely. What Cal did not see was how differently they carried the same weight. As Cal's circle grew, so did his sense of duty towards Merrin, Grease, BD1, and the Hidden Path, constantly expanding the list of people he felt responsible for. Bode went the opposite direction. He let fatherhood become his only value, and over time, everyone who was not Kata became disposable. He worked for the Empire, betrayed Cal, killed Cordova, and continued even after Cal offered him another path. A shared Jedi background, parallel grief, and love at the center of both lives, but completely opposite results. The Jedi saw the danger. They answered it through rules against attachment rather than teaching every Jedi how to carry intimate bonds without turning them into possession. Dagan Gera, a High Republic-era Jedi Cal fought in Jedi Survivor, proved it from further back in time. Cal saw Tanalorr as a refuge for his found family and the Hidden Path. Dagan had once envisioned it as a Jedi stronghold, but after the Order abandoned it, his desire to return hardened into obsession and revenge. Dagan was defined by anger, revenge against the Jedi, and obsession with the planet. Tanalorr stopped being something he hoped to protect and became something he owned. Dagan let his mission consume his identity until there was no version of him left outside of it. Taron Malicos on Dathomir showed a third variation. He survived Order 66, crashed alone on the planet, and fell to the dark side without a single person to hold him accountable. When Cal confronted him, Malicos had a familiar diagnosis. The Jedi fell long before the Purge, stifled by tradition and blinded by war. Cal did not disagree, but using the Force to grab power was everything the Jedi stood against, and Malicos' alternative, rule by fear and no community, was the worst possible answer. 3 Jedi cut loose from effective guardrails, and all 3 became versions of what the Order feared most. Only Cal built a path better than the one he left behind, and the difference came down to the people around him, not the discipline or willpower. On Dathomir, Cal tossed his lightsaber to Merrin, a Nightsister who had been manipulated into blaming the Jedi for the massacre of her people, a massacre actually carried out by Grievous and Separatist forces. Carrying a lightsaber was not what made someone a Jedi. Coming from a member of the Order, handed to a woman who once believed the Jedi had destroyed everything she loved, the gesture went past trust. It meant Cal had stopped believing the Jedi owned the meaning of the Force. Merrin's magic looked nothing like the Jedi technique. Away from Dathomir, Merrin initially struggled to reach her magic, interpreting the loss through place, identity, and grief. Over time, she began to recognize the power as increasingly her own, shaped by forces the Jedi framework could never explain. Cal did not try to make Merrin into a Jedi. He learned from her instead. For Merrin, the Nightsisters' bond was eternal, a standard she measured against what she saw as Jedi betrayal. Even after the Coven's destruction, she carried its teachings into a future the old Jedi Council would never see. Merrin was only one piece of a system that replaced the Council without rebuilding it. After forging his new lightsaber on Ilum, Cal looked at his crew. He had spent years on Bracca dreaming about storming Coruscant alongside Jedi Council survivors. Instead, the Order's future rested on a gambler, a fallen Jedi, and a failed Padawan. the last people anyone would expect to carry a legacy. Each crew member filled a role the Council once tried to hold alone. By the time of Battle Scars, Cere spent much of her time thinking about legacy, about what she should leave behind for the galaxy when she was gone. Grease grounded everyone in normal life. He challenged Cal directly in Battle Scars. The fate of the galaxy did not sit on their shoulders, and Cal was treating every mission like the stakes did not apply to him. BD-1 carried the knowledge Cordova had preserved for the next generation of Jedi, institutional memory without institutional authority. When the crew argued about a mission in Battle Scars, Cere cut through the noise. They were all right, and they were all wrong. Cal noticed something about Cere in that moment. He admired her ability to think before speaking, and was honest enough to admit he lacked it. Grease played a different role entirely. After Cal learned the truth about Cere and Trilla, he stopped trusting his mentor, and the tension between them grew cold. Grease was the one who closed the distance, because someone had to. He owned up to his own mistakes, the ones that had nearly gotten Cal killed. Things were different now. Before the crew, all he cared about was easy money and gambling. Cal and Cere were the best thing that had ever happened to him, and that was reason enough to cut her some slack. A four-armed pilot with a gambling problem became the person who held the crew together at its lowest point, and the Jedi Council had no role for someone like him. Cal's crew could not have survived without him. Even Cal's lightsaber reflected the model, with one end built from Jara Tapal's hilt and the other from Cere's, powered by a kyber crystal, the living stone at the heart of every lightsaber, that split in half on Ilum and still worked. His weapon was built from pieces of other people's legacies, and so was he. While climbing the Zepho tombs, Cal relied on both Jedi movement training and the practical climbing instincts he had sharpened as a scrapper, because his identity had never been pure. It was composite. The crew proved that moral authority is safer when it is spread among people who are free to disagree with each other. But even the Mantis could not answer the hardest question Cal's new life had created. Republic-era Jedi operated inside an established order tied to the Republic. Cal had no surviving council, temple, or Republic chain of command to authorize or review his choices. By Battle Scars, the crew took on missions wherever they could hit the Empire hardest. Cal was an insurgent choosing his own targets and deciding which risks the people around him should carry. Cal was not worried about convincing the crew of the right move, because the Force had not steered him wrong yet and his judgment felt reliable, his mission clear. Grease saw the problem. Cal was gambling, chasing the next win, and he needed to ask himself when the streak would end. Cal's confidence carried a familiar risk. The late Republic Council sometimes operated as though its reading of the Force and its institutional judgment were one and the same, and Cal was reproducing a version of that confidence without even the Council's limited checks. Being free of the old system did not make him automatically right, it made his personal judgment louder. Cal was also the one at the front lines, holding back the darkness so the rest of his family could make a clean escape. He always put himself on the line so nobody else he loved would get hurt. Cal's words were noble, but his decision was unilateral. Nobody asked him to carry that weight alone, and nobody voted on whether the darkness he was holding back was the right fight at the right time. Cere modeled what real accountability looked like. She knelt beside Trilla in the fortress and named her failure out loud. Her choices had taken all of Trilla's choices away. Cal's story offers little evidence of the old council practicing that kind of direct, personal accountability for the institutional failures that shaped him, Cere, and Trilla. Cere carried that principle into Jedi Survivor, building an archive on Jedha and helping run a safe house for the Hidden Path, a network protecting Force-sensitive fugitives. The system needed structure, coordination, and personnel, but it functioned primarily as a refuge for hunted Force users rather than a restored recruitment system or an arm of the Republic. Cere, Cordova, Merrin, Cal, and the Hidden Path redirected Jedi work towards preserving lives and choices rather than restoring the old hierarchy. His story, though, also proves something most fans of these games do not want to hear. Cal grew angrier, more desperate, and more willing to bend his own limits as each new loss piled on. Freedom alone did not make him virtuous. It tested him, and he kept barely passing. Aboard the Mantis, Cere handed Cal her own lightsaber to use in building his new weapon. The struggle with darkness would never stop, and choosing to keep fighting was what made them Jedi. Every Jedi faces the dark side, and it is very easy to fail. Her willingness to arm someone she knew could fall was itself an act of personal trust rather than institutional certification. The Old Order got the diagnosis right. The Force mixed with grief, fear, and desperation is a dangerous combination. The Council was wrong about the prescription. Cal survived without a functioning council or temple, but not without the Jedi teachings and relationships that continued to shape him. When Cal pushed too hard in battle scars, Grease did not submit. He called it out. When Merrin struggled with her own anger, Cal worried alongside her, not as a teacher, but as someone who recognized that pull in himself. The Jedi built walls to keep the dark side out. Cal proved that the only real wall was never a rule. It was always the people standing next to you. But the Empire Cal spent his life resisting was itself the product of a much older design, a Sith legacy that began long before Order 66 with a master whose shadow shaped everything Palpatine became. So watch this video to find out.